name's Brandt Passalacqua, and I am the director of Breathing Deeply Yoga Therapy. We're a yoga therapy training school, and we also offer yoga therapy and meditation training. And I'm here today with Steve Bader, and he is a graduate of our advanced yoga therapy training. And we're here to talk about a couple of his clients. We're using pseudonyms, I should say that at the beginning, that he had some good results with. And we're going to be doing a series of these interviews. And one of the real reasons is to make sure that the public gets some ideas of what's possible with yoga therapy. We see this all the time. And of course, every person is different, but we're trying to get the word out that it can be quite an effective modality. So I'm happy to be here with Steve today. Hi, Steve.
Hello, thank you for having me, Brandt. I'm glad that we could do this. I believe it will be a service to yoga therapists everywhere, as well as individuals, because most of the time when I tell people that I practice yoga therapy, they think I just stretch people until it makes them feel better. And I'm hoping that we can kind of provide some clarity and light on the issue that we're more than just stretchers.
We are definitely more than just strangers. Awesome. All right, so we were going to start with a client you had that had lupus, and I think just for people listening, just real briefly, lupus is an autoimmune disease, and it affects people in many different ways. But some of the myriad of symptoms that you could possibly have with lupus include people often find out about it because they get what's called a butterfly rash on their face. Not everyone gets that. And then people have joint pain, stiffness, swelling, arthritis kind of symptoms, fatigue, fever, headaches. And then you can get some gland involvement and organ involvement even. So it's kind of all over the place, but for most people, it involves flares. And so the symptoms will flare up and then they'll go away and then they'll flare up again. It's a little tricky to diagnose because the symptoms mimic lots of other things. So sometimes people go a little while if they don't get that rash, trying to figure out what's wrong with them. And what I wanted to say upon an introduction I think might be useful is that there is an awesome Western treatment. People use steroids, they're, anti-inflammatories, people use NSAIDs, people use malaria drugs to change the immune system, but it's not the kind of disease where there's like a super great solution for people with lupus. So that's my introduction to I've worked with lupus as well as Steve here. So do you have anything to add to that?
That was a great introduction, Brent, because it touched on a few things that my client described when I first met her. We're going to call her Jessica for this podcast. When I first met Jessica during our intake session, she said that she was first diagnosed with lupus in 2015, so 9 years ago, but that she felt and remembers experiencing symptoms for it 20 to 30 years prior, which touches upon what you said, that it's hard to diagnose. And another aspect is the flare-up aspect. When I had met her, Jessica was just coming out of, I believe it was like a 6-month period where she was having multiple flare-ups, one big flare-up with a rash that lasted about 3 months. And that's where we started working together at. She had the goal, Jessica wasn't delusional thinking that she could do yoga therapy and cure lupus. Her goals coming in were to manage the symptoms and hopefully reduce the amount of flare-ups, which I thought was a very good mindset rather than hoping for some miracle cure. And I think that benefited her approach in yoga therapy and what she was going to derive from it.
And then how did she even know to find a yoga therapist? Like, what made her think of that?
Jessica was a yoga practitioner, and so in one of her yoga classes, she came upon the concept of yoga therapy, and that's how we became linked up.
Great. Okay. So why don't you tell us, I think it'd be good to hear like what she ended up doing, basically, in terms of what kind of yoga, what were her practices?
One of her main goals starting out was to help alleviate the joint stiffness and joint weakness that she started experiencing, especially after her longer period of flare-ups. She didn't get to exercise as much. She had periods where she was resting more and felt that she lost some strength in her hips and shoulders specifically. When this was the first aspect that we started working on in our sessions together, and we did starting out light not even full asanas. We call it the joint freeing series, where you move each joint, even if it's as small as a wrist, your neck, feet, ankles, knees, hips, through all the ranges of motion they can go, and trying to time it with the breath. So not only does that help someone move the joints that they might not be moving and get all of those joints moving through the range of motion, by tying it with the breath, we're helping to calm down the nervous system. We're helping to bring somebody back into their body. We started off with these practices for about a month before we even moved on to incorporating asanas to help her start strengthening the joints.
And how often did she do these?
I encouraged her to do the joint freeing series daily if she could. I let it slide if there was a busy day. Everyone has those, but I wanted her to try and do that after she woke up, so that her joints would hopefully start to feel less stiff, especially coming out of bed, which was one of her main complaints.
And then what happened after a month? Anything? Did she have any improvements?
She had improvements where the stiffness started to reside, and she came to a point where Jessica felt comfortable doing asana, where it wasn't as much of a chore getting into the poses. It wasn't throughout her work day. She worked at a desk typically, and she didn't feel quite as stiff at the end of the day because the joint freeing series helped that. And with the joint freeing series being something as simple as just moving a joint, she could sneak them into her work day, which is a lot easier than jumping into downward facing dog by the side of your desk.
Okay, so she did that for a month, and then you gave her more poses. You gave her some poses to do.
Yeah, we moved on to asanas that, even going into them, we focused on that moving and breathing aspect. So we would take poses such as Warrior One and start with the knees bent and time it with the breath. Or I'm sorry, start with the legs straight and time it with the breath, where you would move into the pose, the expression with the knees bent, you'd pause, and you'd come back out, and you'd go a couple times, and then you would get into the full expression of the pose and hold it there with the breath, trying to aim for sweetness and ease, stira and sukha within her pose, so that she wasn't pushing too far where it might cause her joints to ache afterwards, but it was helping to support that, to bring that supported nature to all of her joints that might have been lacking from the period of bed rest.
And so how long did she do asanas for? Like what?
Asanas, I didn't have her do the asana practice every day. That was 2 to 3 times per week. And for a couple of months, I think it was around 2 months that she did the asana practice, and that helped her. But during this time, after the asana practice was given, we started working on some of the more subtle realms along with it to support her journey in relieving the symptoms of lupus.
So for someone who's not a yoga practitioner, what does subtle realms mean?
In the subtle realm, we started working with breath work, or in yoga therapy terms, pranayama, to help not only with so one aspect that breath work can help with, regardless if you look at it through the yoga lens or if you look at it through a Western scientific physiological lens, is that the breath work can help calm down the nervous system. It can help rebalance certain aspects of like oxygen, carbon dioxide in your bloodstream, and help rebalance that. So we did a practice called alternate nostril breathing, which typically is you block one nostril, inhale up, let go, exhale through the other, and then vice versa. However, with lupus being one of the main symptoms, as we talked about earlier, being rashes, specifically that butterfly rash, Jessica didn't want to do a lot of touching of her nose. And we altered the practice to, if you were closing your right nostril, you'd close your right fist, open it up when it was open.
Focus on one nostril. So it's a good example of how a yoga therapist might be important for someone with a condition like this, because there would be things you'd want to change. Like you've already mentioned, like the pacing of how you brought out the practices, and then how you do each practice, and whether you're breathing or not, and how far you're going to go into a pose. So I think if I was listening and I had lupus, what I'd want to know now I'd be thinking to myself, okay, so she did some poses, she did some breathing, she did this joint freeing series thing. So she's putting in a little work. She's doing like poses 2 or 3 times a week. She's got these breathing and joint freeing kind of practices she does regularly. How long did you work with her in total?
Total, we worked together about 5 months. There was one other practice I want to mention before I get to the results of our work together, and that is a practice called yoga nidra, which is a relaxation practice, but also a meditation. It involves someone typically lying down, and oftentimes it has a body scan where you feel different parts of your body and you start to become in tune with different sensations. It could be opposites like hot and cold. It could be the breath moving in and out. And that relaxation helps, again, on the more subtle realms that we alluded to earlier, the nervous system, and helps to bring balance within her.
Yeah. And in our school, what we see, and we have autoimmune protocols in our school. And one of the things we see is that yoga nidra it's not 100%, but we've had extremely good luck lessening symptoms and changing people's outcomes with yoga nidra. I think what I would add is like it's definitely guided, and it can be done a bunch of different ways. And one of the reasons it changes things is some research indicates it changes brainwave states, which changes how your body heals. So it seems a little esoteric, but it's kind of standard in our school. And of course, you implemented that. And we're about to see what happened with all these things. So you could say, the thing about yoga therapy is that you're doing a lot of different things sometimes. So you never know which thing is the thing, or all of them together, which is probably more likely the result. So you work with their body, you work with their breath, you work with more subtle systems, including her mind. And she sees you for 5 months. How often did you see her?
It was about, when we first started, it was weekly, and then it tapered off to about twice a month.
Okay, so you see her once a week, then you see her twice a month. And give us the results of this work she did.
At the end, our last session, Jessica reported back to me that her doctor told her that her lupus was in remission. That was the second time ever in her life, and the first time without steroids. The first time when she used steroids, it caused her to gain 20 pounds. And this time, without the steroids, she's feeling better. She's moving. She's active. She started going to the gym, started hiking.
Yeah, I mean, I have also worked with people with lupus and seen similar results. It's important that people know that it's possible, and that we have some agency, right? Some effect over our own system. So this is a really, really great example of that. Like, this is a perfect example kind of how your own effort with some guidance can help. So I'm sure you felt really good about working with her. I mean, that's a lot.
I did. And a key sentence you said there is your own effort. Jessica was pretty much the perfect client to work with. She was dedicated to it. The yoga nidra she did pretty much daily, was seeking the guidance that I was providing, and was actively doing the practices, which helped her in her journey to lessen the symptoms and effect that lupus had on her life.
Yeah.
And I always had faith that the practices were going to help somebody such as Jessica, but the amount of time, 5 months, is not too long of a duration. And Jessica was experiencing improvements even 2 or 3 months into it.
Yeah. And now she has the skills. Like, she doesn't really need you, which is another thing.
Correct.
She could obviously come back, but she doesn't need you, right? Like, that's the goal of yoga therapy. We don't want
exactly
clients forever.
Yeah, I haven't talked to her in months.
Right. So
at least half a year.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see. What I've seen in my practice when I keep in touch with people is when people get these kinds of results, they often really lessen their flares. So you get people that were flaring like 5 times a year, and now it's like once a year. You get a big reduction in symptoms and in flare frequency. So sounds like she might be in that category. So Steve, how could someone find you directly if they just wanted to follow up on this?
I have a website called badermovement.com. On there, you'll find more information about myself, more information about the services I provide, and a way to contact me or an intake session.
Great. And you're in Buffalo, correct?
Correct. I'm in Buffalo, New York. I work in the Buffalo region, but I also have capabilities to work through Zoom if you are not in the Buffalo area.
Awesome. So you can find Stephen there. And if you want to find out more about our school, we are at breathingdeeply.com. You can contact us for yoga therapists, including Steve. We'll find him for you if you don't find his website. There's a tab on our website for that. We have trainings where we train yoga therapists. We have a meditation school. And we have some courses and more to come on yoga therapy for different conditions. So if you're looking for help yoga therapy wise, feel free to contact us and we'll do our best to help you. Thank you, Steve. Awesome work. And it's great working with you in general. So I would definitely recommend anyone working with Steve.